Join the Coven. The Returners, a story written by CleavingThoughtFromBone. Marion and her husband Jack were on their way home from a glorious night out on the town. A favorite comedian of their generation had performed at the local theatrical performing arts center, and their chances to witness his antics in person were fading fast. Soon he would either retire or die. Age has a way with life in that only one thing is certain: death. Not that morbidity enveloped their thoughts, more the observation of reason, a simple law of nature that the living has become accustomed to. So, given the tickets were more affordable than most would imagine, the two scooped up a pair of nearly front row seats for next to nothing. Their evening had been filled with laughter and joy, the cares and stresses of the day floating off with the levity in the air. A lightness that pervaded the exterior wall of the Palace Theater and accompanied them to their car. The positivity would have likely followed them all the way to their front door and beyond. But the circumstances of morality would shake loose the pleasant aura lingering over them both, replacing it with tragedy, confusion, and a mayhem that only hell itself could provide. The whistle of wind coupled with the muffled voices of what sounded a little like voices, low voices, men's voices, all garbled as if detected from underwater, is what Marion first noticed. Marion slowly opened her eyes, and at first she felt no pain, no inclination that anything was wrong, except for that she wasn't quite sure of where she was or what had happened. As she turned her head, she noticed the crunch of glass beneath her skull, resting on something solid yet covered in a plush, soft fabric of some kind. Although blurry, Marion's vision was slowly clearing, making it more and more possible for her to focus and finally gain understanding of her surroundings. She was in the car, but something was wrong. It was upside down. The windows had been all busted out, causing the shards of glass to collect on the roof, now turned into the floor that Marion had been lying upon. Beyond the broken windshield, the cold still of dark night covered the outside world like a black blanket, and although those murmuring voices had been becoming louder, she still could not discern where they were coming from. Marion now made a grimacing expression with her eyes, pain now beginning to throb in her shoulder, growing by the second. When she tried to move, a jolt of agony caused her mind to focus with acuity. Her collarbone was obviously broken, and the memories of the last few moments that had passed, the ones she had forgotten, now began to float to the surface of her consciousness like a churning bubble from the deep. The flash of whipping, streaking lights outside the passenger window, the droning hum of tires riding smooth pavement. They had been on the highway, on their way home. Marion struggled to remember. The images and events were all blurry and jumbled together. She remembered a car and someone driving recklessly in front of them. Jack was doing his best to get around him, but centrifugal force and bald tires caused him to lose control of the vehicle. The last memory she could recall was watching the hood of the car careen through a guardrail and off the side of a bridge. Now she wondered why she was not wet with the river water below. But she would eventually gain the knowledge that they had avoided them. landing and rolling on the stony shoreline of the moderately sized river. Jack! Thoughts of concern for her husband rushed to the forefront of her thinking. Jack! She called out, looking over to see him upside down in his seatbelt. She yelled over to him again, but Jack did not move. The trickle of blood leaking from his forehead had begun to form a small pool of red directly beneath him. It's okay, ma'am. We're going to get you out of there. Try not to move. Marion heard an authoritative yet gentle voice from outside the car, right next to her overturned door. She rolled her head to the side, seeing a gathering of feet, all dressed in boots. She recognized them as the enhanced versions of the murmured voices. A response team had already arrived while she had been unconscious. My husband, Jack, she tried to speak. Again, the man asked her not to struggle, and that he and his men would have them out of there in no time flat. Marion's wounds must have been more severe than she had realized, because amid the loud noises of machinery and tearing metal, Marion slipped into unconsciousness. Marion's eyes fluttered open, and although over an hour had passed, time shifted in the blink of an eye for her. One moment she was upside down in a mangled mash of steel and glass, and the next surrounded by blue curtains and a white ceiling. Not an ounce of pain to be felt. Marion started to talk, or more or less tried, but it was enough for her to get the attention of nearby hospital staff. A nurse peeked in through one of the blue curtains and gave Marion a smile. She had long black hair and eyes as blue as sapphires. The nurse reassured Marion that the doctor would be in to talk to her shortly, asking if she was comfortable. After receiving a reply, the nurse left, closing the curtain behind her. By the time a man wearing a long white coat entered through the fabric, Marion had regained much of her vocalization capabilities. The man introduced himself as Dr. Mazzotti, greeting her with the same warm smile as his nurse provided earlier, displaying exceptional bedside manner. She asked how she had gotten there, and if there was anything wrong with her or her husband. The doctor informed her that she had arrived unconscious and that the car was a total wreck. He told her that she was lucky to be alive and reassured her that, surprisingly, she had only suffered a dislocated shoulder and sustained mild concussion. Wait, you didn't answer my question. How's my husband? How's Jack? She asked, an urgent demanding in her tone. Well, Mrs. Noonan, there were some complications, but I can assure you that your husband will be just fine, the doctor began. What do you mean? What kind of complications? She asked him, passing right over the part where he was deemed okay. Like I said, he's going to be fine. Your husband sustained a substantial wound to the front of his head. Luckily, it didn't hit his brain, but the shock was enough to send him into cardiac arrest. Oh my God, Marion exclaimed. Now calm down. You need to rest. He's going to be just fine, he assured her. You said there were complications. Is that what you meant? Well, it was touch and go for a bit, and to be honest, we lost him there for a minute. 2 to be exact. He died? Marion said in a ghastly surprise. Well, yes, technically, your husband was clinically dead for almost 2 minutes, but we were able to regain and stabilize his vital signs. He should be awake soon. As soon as you've rested enough, I will let you see him, if you are doing well. I'm going to release you tomorrow, but I'd like Jack to stay with us for a couple days, just for observation purposes, he finished. But is he... Yes, Dr. Mazzotti interrupted her. Like I said, it was touch and go for a while, but I can assure you, Jack will be just fine. Now I want you to get some rest after the nurse checks your vitals. No solids and plenty of rest. We'll be waking you up every few hours though to check on your progress and to make sure that concussion doesn't give you any trouble, he finalized as he exited the room. Marion was plenty upset, worried about her husband, and found the thought of rest laughable. Maybe it was the painkillers, or maybe just the stress of such a nearly traumatic evening. But soon after the nurse left her, the television on quietly, Marion drifted off into a deep, blissful rest. Marion awoke to the sound of a distant, muffled scream. Through the closed door of her hospital room, it sounded like a woman's voice that had created it. And whoever had made it had now ceased their shrieking. Marion listened on. Nothing but the sounds of the hospital equipment around her. The television on the wall before her was off, and she scanned the room, affirming that she was indeed alone. Marion reached out with her right hand and gripped a small cylinder-shaped device, a small red button on one end and a cord attached to the other. She pressed down on the button, waiting for a nurse to come into the room. After a while, she pressed it again and again, but there were no sounds of anyone approaching her door from the hall beyond. A feeling inside her ached for her to remain where she was. But she was determined. She just had to know if anyone had heard word of her husband. If she could see him yet. Never mind what that noise was or who had made it. That would be her second line of inquiry. Shoving herself upward and lifting her bottom off the side of the raised hospital bed, Marion's feet hit the linoleum floor with a slap. Standing, the first thing that she noticed was coming from beneath the door in front of her. It was a flickering light that flashed within the small space at the bottom. She recalled that most hospital rooms had a glass window on each door, but apparently this one did not, placing Marion in the imposition of not having a clue as to what awaited her on the other side. She approached it slowly, still listening intently for anything beyond. Still nothing but absolute silence. A stillness awkward to a hospital even deep within the witching hours of the night. Something was wrong. She just sensed it. Marion lifted her arm and placed her right hand on the door handle. With a twist, the latch released and the door pulled open with ease. Her eyes fixated upon an empty hospital hallway. Aside from the flickering overhead lights, nothing seemed out of place. Then, after a moment, she noticed something else as well. The lack of people. There were no staff to be heard or seen. No one walking the hallways, and no one had come to check on her, hitting the button intended for summoning an attendant on duty. Maybe there's some kind of power outage, Marion thought to herself. But she knew even then that hospitals had backup generators in case of an outage. Such a thing shouldn't affect the functions of this place. "Hello?" Marion called out down the hall. She waited for the sounds of something, any kind of reply, and for a while, her call was not returned. But right as she had given up listening and intended to call out again, something sounded out from down the corridor before her. A noise that seemed to scrape along her bones. She had no clue what it was, but it was getting closer from somewhere in the flickering void before her that dimmed as it extended forward. Marion turned and tried her best to run. "Help! Help!" she called out, for anyone to hear, hoping someone would come to her aid. Weakened by her injuries and the medication, Marion thought it best to hunker down in one of the public restrooms that was now available, just beside her. Panting and panicked, she thrust the door open and shut it behind her. The sound of whatever approached was becoming fainter. Marion walked towards the sinks and the mirrors, trying to forget her thoughts. Jack. She had to get to Jack. The sound of sudden rushing water caused Marion to jump in surprise. The sink faucets all shut on at once, without a touch or a turn of the nozzle. 4 sinks caught the rush of water, and slowly, in widening eyes of disbelief, the water began to turn red and thick. The faucets began spewing what looked like blood under the poor, flickering illumination. Marion heard a noise from behind her, and before she had time to fully turn around, the figure was already upon her. It took her a few words into the sobbing woman's sentence to recognize her as the nurse with the sapphire eyes, now panic-stricken with unnameable fear. "It's here! There's something here! Oh my God, the water! What the hell is going on?" she exclaimed at Marion. I don't know," Marion began, before the woman continued on. "I'm getting the hell out of here! Screw this!" she exclaimed before turning and bolting towards the door. The woman pulled it open and jerked to run, but stopped herself before taking a single step. The nurse let out a powerful scream before being cut short, followed by the sounds of gurgling noises. Marion strained with her eyes, her heart pounding so hard that she could feel it thumping in her throat. But beyond the woman stood a shape, similar in form to Marion, but slightly larger, a shadow of a person silhouetted by the flickering ambient light. The nurse dropped to the floor with a thud, and when she did, the sink faucets behind Marion shut off once again, causing her to turn and look only for a second before looking back. The thing was right there, breathing in her face, and it had moved to be right on top of her within the flash of a millisecond. Marion gasped and prepared to scream, but the face of the being stopped her with its familiarity. "Jack?" Marion whispered. It had the face of her husband. It was her husband. But something was wrong with him. His face and clothes were splotched red, with no apparent wounds. His face was contorted into a sadistic smirk. And his eyes. Jack's eyes were 2 glossy pits of the deepest black, like 2 large opals that glistened when the light above happened to touch them. "Jack?" Marion asked again. "Jack, what's happened to you?" "You have no idea," Jack finally spoke, and in the absence of Marion's commentary, he continued. "You don't know. I died, Marion. I died. Do you know how long a moment lasts in hell? A lifetime. Jack has returned to you, Marion, but he is no longer the Jack you knew. But the great thing about it is, I have all the time in the world to show you exactly what I mean." Jack lunged at her, and Marion's world went instantly dark. Marion awoke to the sounds of beeping and the brilliance of bright lights. The survivors of the massacre across town had been transported to the next nearest hospital. Had there been a few more injured, the overflow would have caused the alternative institution to become overloaded beyond capacity. The doctors around her were speaking to police, asking if the culprits had been located. The officer shook his head side to side, and then asked about the woman's condition, referring to Marion. The doctor told him the worst of it was over, that it was touch and go for a while, that she had even slipped into the grip of death for a minute or two. Marion listened, without saying a word, and smiled a sinister grin.